I'd like to talk now about color balance and proportion. In other words, we can do lots of exercises about how to mix colors and color harmonies, analogous harmonies, and saturate and desaturate it. Once we get that, we've got to decide, well, how much do we use? Because we might get a color harmony, but if we use the wrong amounts, just like recipes and food, we get all the ingredients correctly, but we then have to decide, well, how much of that how much salt we put in, how much of it is it twice as much? Because if we get that wrong, no matter how nice our ingredients are, they won't come together. So just a little example of that, and to give you some idea, and hopefully, I kind of hope this works, but um, I'm just trying to look up the thing here. So hopefully you're seeing that screen with the green and the red beside it there. And what I've simply done is have a large amount shape here of a green, and beside it have a little smaller piece of red. Red is the complementary of green. In other words, on the color wheel, they're two opposites. They're on either side of the color wheel. So if I move my red in here, and let's say what I'll do is I'll put it up there and I'll make it a little bit bigger, okay? And this can be hard sometimes to envision, but hopefully you can get some sense of it. When we have red and green together and about half and half, you know, that's what we see. That's what we get. Okay. There's a certain energy in there, and we can decide where the focal point is and whatever. If I then decide, no, look, green will dominate, and what I'll do is I'll bring in the red as a little accent, a small amount within the bigger amount of green. The result is different. The red becomes very much a focal point and also appears quite richer. So the smaller that you make the area of complementary color, very often what happens, the richer it appears because it really sings out because it's so different to all of the green around it. So if you're thinking about a landscape here, this is an example. So if we have a small object that happens to be red in a green area, it will really, really sing out. Our eyes will catch it. Now, the problem is that pure complementaries together almost become a bit optical. They're a wee bit, your eyes start to see that they feel like they're moving and things. And complementaries are used for that reason in advertising and things like that. So as artists, we might think, well, that's maybe too severe. We don't want our audience to be so hit in the face with extremes like that. So what we use is what's called a near complementary. We can use a near complementary. So in other words, instead of red, we can use purple. If you think about the color wheel and you look at red, if you move around a little bit, the next color, if you like, on the way around is purple. Just so if I then was to take this red here and I'm going to attempt to, and this is change it to violet there, look. You see that it's still attractive. It still stands out and it's a complementary in a sense. It's very different from green, but it's not as extreme. It's not as exaggerated, obviously, because there's a little blue in it. If you think about that, purple has some blue in it. And so has green. Green is made up of blue and yellow. So they both have something in common, but yet they're not quite the same because they're nearly opposite on the color wheel, but they're not quite. And that's why it's called near complementary color. And the same thing applies to any other color. So if I can maybe take my green here and see if I can find uh, another color. Let's say this, which is orange, okay? Now the complementary of orange is officially blue. So if I can find a blue here, we would have that. So there's orange with a little complement of blue in there. And again, you can see the blue really shines out against that. And maybe it's a wee bit in your face. I'll maybe make it a little bit bigger just to see palms. So again, if you think of a near complementary, if you think of where are we between the blue and orange, if you go one way, you can have a color like purple, which is not quite blue. In other words, it's near blue, but it's got blue in it. Or you can also use green. So if we were to use green, let's say we take this and we find our green, you can see again that the green, I hope you can see, it shows up, it complements, it gives a focal point, but it's not, it has some relationship with yellow because there is yellow in green. Yellow is used to make green, so it has something in common. And there's yellow in orange and yellow in green. That's what I meant to say. So they both have something in common. So there's another near complementary color, and we could do this with all the permutations of complementaries and near complementaries. But hopefully you see that a color like this, a color combination like this, is more sympathetic and something natural about it, as opposed to perhaps, as I say, if we go back to the pure blue here, you can see how, oh, pardon me, you can see how the pure blue is just a bit right in your face. Likewise, proportion. If we'd increase the amount of blue, so the blue becomes dominant, it's a different experience. It's really shining out there. If we bring it down to kind of like maybe half and half approximately. In fact, let's just do that. Let's split that and make that about half of the rectangle is blue, half of it's orange. And you can see there we have that. And then if I change that fill to our near complementary of green, you can see, I hope, that there's something relationship there with those colors. Okay, so it's not an easy concept to grasp at the beginning, but if you think about what we call near complementary, so when you're painting, if you're making a landscape, let's say, and there's lots of greens in it, we instinctively think red's complementary. So put a wee flash of red in there, like a roof of a house or something. Yes, it will work, but try putting a near complementary, in other words, possibly an orange there or possibly a wee bit of purple, and it will be a wee bit more sympathetic to the whole thing. So hopefully that's a useful exercise. What I'm going to do here is a little experiment, and we'll see if it works or not. But it's to do with this business of color distribution. Okay, I'm just going to take some watercolors. There's little tubs of 4 colors here. That's ultramarine. That's Hooker's green. That's burnt umber, and that's, I think, yellow ochre there. And I've just taken 4 colors, and I'm going to try something. You can see a vague generic landscape there again, and what I simply want to do is begin with these 4 colors. So starting off with the obvious thing here, blue is going to flood in there. Okay, just take that, give the brush a wee wipe here, and that's the only color. I'm going to take that up to the edge of there, and you get variations in the blue, which is quite nice as well, but essentially I don't want to do much else other than use that one color. There might be a little bit of bleeding going on here, so I'll try to avoid it if I possibly can. What I'll do then is take the Hooker's green, put it in, and you can see what we know. Hooker's green is it's a bit like Viridian green. It's quite a severe color, so I'm going to put that in there. These are sort of, again, as I say, generic hills or mountains or whatever, but as artists we're trying to see them as pieces of color. At least that's what I would like you to do at the moment. Okay, moving down, then we'll move to, let's say, the yellow ochre now, and drop some of that in. You can see how that's a strong colour too, which is kind of the purpose of what I'm hopefully gonna show to you here. So we're talking about colour harmonies here. So you can see that these are strong, powerful colours, and we'll drop in the umber here at the front, which is quite a little deeper, darker as it were. So that gives maybe a wee bit of a base to the whole painting. I'll actually move it up slightly so you can see that. So it'll bleed a little bit, but that's fair enough, you know. But essentially what I've done is create 4 slabs of colour here. And in a normal circumstances, you might say, well, there's a sort of harmony going on there, in the sense that they're earthy colours, except maybe for the blue or whatever. But they're not working, as you can see. They're not working as a comfortable harmony, because they're stripe, 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 stripe kind of thing, and there's no relationship to them. And that's because of the way the colour is distributed. So, you know, they distribute it evenly and equally. In other words, there's a strip of brown, a yellow ochre, green and blue, and they're separate, and they're for that reason they're distributed in that way. But if you're painting, whether it be watercolour or any other medium, and as you're painting, be conscious of how you can redistribute the colour. Now, the thing is, as artists, we are trying to create something that's, if you like, better than real life. So that if you're painting from real life, don't be afraid to let yourself play with colour. That's what turns your painting into something unique that's not a photograph. However, this distribution thing, so let's say I take on the end of this little brush here some of the umber, and I'm going to drop it. And the paint, the ochre here is obviously still wet, and it kind of works better in a way if the paints are wet. Same with oils and acrylic. So I'm going to drop that in there. Let's drop a little bit of the blue here down into the green. So I'm going to just drop it around, bleed that. And of course we know what's happening here is that we're creating a different colour, as it were. But all we're doing to achieve this is swapping colours over. And if you feel you need harmony, sometimes the simple thing is to take a little bit from here and put it there, and vice versa. So we take a bit of green from here, drop it in there, not too much. You know, we talked about this business of how much colour. If you have a little green there and let it be, then it'll sing out. If you spread it everywhere, then you're back to square one, that all you'll have is another sort of one colour thing. But I'm dropping that in there. I'm going to bring up the ochre and drop it in here to amongst the green and move it around. I'm using a very small brush here. Maybe move over to a slightly bigger brush for this particular part of the painting here, and move it around a little bit here. I hope what you start to see is some sort of a relationship, which makes sense, because what we're doing is giving a little bit and taking a little bit from each of the things. I'm going to take a little bit of the umber, and I'm going to drop that, a wee bit of water maybe in there too, but throw it in and let it drop into the blue and see what it does to the blue. You can see here it's beginning to grey up the blue, because umber into blue tends to nullify the blue a bit. So the blue is no longer that slab of colour. Let's take a little bit of the umber. I don't know if we've done that, and maybe we have. The umber up into the green. So really what we're doing essentially is mixing all of these colours together, but we're distributing them differently, if I could say that, in these little spots. So spot here, spot there. Essentially though, I'm still trying to keep the fact that there's a blue sky, there's a greenish hill, there's a ochre piece of grass or whatever it could be, and there's umber at the bottom. I still want to achieve that, but you know, they are the dominant colours. But what I've done is give a little fleck of the other colours in there. I'm dropping a little bit of ochre down into the umber here, just here and there, not everywhere. And I'm beginning to get carried away and starting to play around with little suggestions of grass and things here, but that's okay. Maybe a little bit more blue, you know, in there, not too much, you know. So I don't want, really what I'm saying is I don't want this area to turn blue completely, otherwise that defeats the purpose. It's no longer a separate entity. I don't want the blue to go green, I don't want the yellow ochre to go umber and so on. And maybe even take a little stronger piece of blue here. So we can add blue back in, but you can see that what's happening, and maybe I'd like to just take, maybe just down the edge of here, we'll put a wee bit of blue just there. So I'm beginning to create, I suppose, shadows and things there, you know. But what I hope you see is from the beginning, which is simply 4 slabs of colour, we now still have 4 areas of colour. We identify that's blue, that's green, that's a yellowish, that's brown, but they're not quite totally all one colour. And what we've done is by sharing the colours around, our eyes, you know, moved around that. Now, of course, we could mix all these colours on the palette and do what I've done. But if you work spontaneously as you go, I think it can also give a nice excitement to the painting as well. So there's quite a lot of yellow ochre there, but it's not enough to make that become like that. There's bits of green in there, and there's bits of umber in there, but essentially the yellow wins the battle, the brown wins the battle, the green wins the battle, and the blue wins the battle. But they're not, as they were at the beginning, 4 separate slabs. Now this is a different situation here. This is a little painting with acrylic paints, okay, and the reason I've done this is just to show you another technique. It's just I painted over the top of another little painting I did in one of the other videos actually, and again, like the previous one, the watercolor, I've split it into very distinct slabs. So that's a light blue, a blue, a darker blue, that's blue with a wee bit of green in it. This is green. This is a brown, which I made up from the primary colours, red and yellow, to make an orange, and then dropped a tiny wee bit of blue in it to make it brown. And then that's just pretty much pure ultramarine blue, I think. So again, very separate colours. On the face of it, you would think, well, it makes sense if sky is blue and the fields are green and whatever, but we know it's not harmonious. Now, what we did with the watercolor and what can be done with oils is, because they stay wet for a reasonable time, and they can do, we can bleed into them, which is what I did when I used the watercolor. With acrylics, that's a wee bit more difficult because they dry so quickly. If you work fast, yes, of course you can do it, but I just wanted to show you this is dry completely. And what I have on my palette here, hopefully you see here, if I can do that, there is that color, that is that color, this here is that color, and the blues are these colors here. So I have these 4 colors on my palette. What I want you to notice, so I'll just set that on top of the painting. There's a little brush I'm going to use here. I washed it and wiped it, so it's barely damp. There's very, very little on it. And you can also see, look how thin that paint is and how transparent. So there's just a rub of paint. You can see that on my hand. That's all there is. So this time we're distributing the color in a different way. We're not working wet into wet. We're working wet over dry. So I have, just by chance here, I've put that brown. I don't know if I can get that in so you can see the colors I'm using, hopefully. That wee rub of brown, I'm going to take and rub it. You can hear the brush rubbing a little bit here, a little bit of that there, okay. Just not going to be too choosy about where it goes. But again, not, pardon me, not absolutely everywhere. Clean the brush up. Let's take a little of our blue here, over here. And the thing is with acrylics, it's even slightly drying on my palette here, but I can add a little more water. So over here, I'm going to take that blue, I'm going to rub that in over, so it's transparent, but you can see what it's doing to the brown, I hope, anyway. Here and there, it's changing the brown, muddying the brown up to some extent. You know, and I'm not, you know, not making big choices here. I'm just randomly doing this. Let's see if we have that blue. Let's put a little bit, rub a little bit in there to the green area, okay? You can see how thin this is, you know. It's really almost like a watercolor technique. Let's take the green now, maybe, and let's bring it down to the brown. So you can see rubbing over the top, the transparent glazing that's happening there, how that is changing that brown. Maybe a little bit here and there, a wee bit thicker, you know, just to give it a wee spark of green. But again, don't overdo it, because this has to remain a separate entity. We have to identify that as a brownish color, okay? Let's take this darker blue, and again, maybe let's take the green in that. Rub a little bit of green here and there, just scrubbing it in. We few wee patches, changes it a little bit. Let's take now our lighter blues. Let's give that brush another wee bit of a wash there. We'll make a wee bit more of that up actually, because it has gone a wee bit dry. So you can see what I'm doing there. And then what I'm doing is really rubbing it until there's hardly, you see that, hardly any on the brush there. And maybe then taking a little bit of that over parts of the green. You know, so I'm trying to remember where I put the colour. But once it goes on, I'm rubbing it in. And with acrylics, because it dries quickly, I can probably build up a lot of variations there. I'm going to put a wee bit of that colour rubbed over the top of that colour here and there, so you can now see it's not all one solid blue. There's variations in it. Let's see if we were taking, just again want to clean that, keep the brush relatively clean. Let's go up to our brownish colour again, very, very thin, and maybe rub some of that really, really thin. You can see that over the top blue there. So we're creating a warmth, and this again is an impressionist technique. It's what the impressionists did. They carried colours around. So I hope already, let's say we use that in the cloud area, for example. I sort of saw there's a cloud on the left-hand side here. Pretend it is anyway. You can rub that in until, I mean, you can even take sometimes and rub it with a rag and it still remains on there. With acrylics, it's handy if you happen to have an acrylic medium. It allows it to stay wet maybe for a bit longer and also makes it more transparent. But I'm just using water here and working away at that. And this is maybe risky, but I'm going to try putting a wee bit of this greenish blue here. Look, again, dilute that a wee bit more and go in maybe down here on the sky and just take, see what happens if we take that colour up into the sky. So here I am again exchanging colours, rubbing one from the other, back and forward. And, you know, even carrying that up, what about a wee bit of warmth in that distance there? You know, rub that in. Suddenly that becomes a little bit warmer. Maybe even let's do something to this quite severe blue here by carrying that up there. And hopefully you're starting to see how the colours are merging and there's a relationship of some sort beginning to happen. And they're not so harsh anymore. They're not separate pieces, that they all have a little of each other in them, and yet they are still separate in the sense we can identify them, that that's essentially blue, essentially green, essentially blue, essentially brown, but it's not on its own. And so therefore our brains feel that there's a family of harmony here.